I thank the member and call the member for McKellar.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have to thank the member for Wakefield for that interesting speech. I shall pass on his best wishes to my predecessor, and in particular the tone in which his gracious remarks were delivered. I would also suggest to the member for Wakefield, if South Australia wishes to get more infrastructure, perhaps he should speak to his good friend, the Treasurer of the South Australian Government, and advocate that he finally take delivery of the Royal Adelaide Hospital instead of holding off on it. Madam Speaker, it's almost over. Well, I think that should be Labor's slogan. It's almost open. Madam Deputy Speaker, budgets are incredibly important to the running of any country and to any government. As a Liberal, I believe in equality of opportunity rather than mandated equality of outcomes. And budgets are the keystone to how any government provides both the stability and the platform on which you can grow your economy and allow people to take advantage of all the opportunities that this great nation of ours provides for them. This budget is about growth, providing for essential services, putting downward pressure on cost of living, and government living within its means. The issue is that every government has a choice. It has a choice between growing the cake so that everyone gets more, or fighting over who gets how much of the slice, how much portion of those cakes. This budget is unashamedly about growing the cake. It is about saying to all Australians, wherever they may live, wherever they may come from, whatever their circumstances are from which they were born, that they have an opportunity to become anything they want. Because the opportunities in this country are completely and absolutely endless. There is the problem with running budget deficits ad nauseum for any time in length is that it makes your community poorer. You can't continue to live for a government not to be able to live within its means. Because the Austrian economists showed many years ago that what happens is the private sector, private individuals, realise that government can't keep going on spending, can't keep going on taxing without there being a point of adjustment. So what happens is the private sector pulls back on its spending, private individuals hoard cash because they know the time is coming. And we've seen this in reality. We've seen this in real life. It's not just a theory. It has happened. When Margaret Thatcher in 1979 brought in her budget that reduced the deficit of the United Kingdom budget, there were 182 academic economists who wrote an open letter to the Financial Times telling her she was wrong. But what we found was that in the 1980s, that unleashed a wave of investment that created prosperity in the United Kingdom. For 4 or 5 decades, the United Kingdom had been suffering a decline in prosperity. That was reversed when Margaret Thatcher brought the budget under control. We saw it with Ronald Reagan in 1981. We saw it with Bill Clinton in 1992 and then again in 1994. Everyone thought the United States government was out of control, that it would never be able to pay back its debts, that its unfunded liabilities would eat the country alive. Bill Clinton, by cutting the budget, by moderately increasing taxes, and then by cutting even further in 1994 with social welfare reform, had the result of reducing the net government borrowing and unleashing a wave of investment into the American economy that led to a decade of prosperity and peace throughout the world. And this is the difference between Labor and the Liberal Party. We believe that people are best placed to make their own decisions about how they spend their money and the manner in form in which they spend their money, because that's the best way to grow the economy. Now, Labor left us with a lot of unexploded landmines. One example is the NDIS. This is a scheme that helps fellow Australians who, through no fault of their own, find themselves after a catastrophic accident not being able to look after themselves. This scheme has gone unfunded for too long. When Julia Gillard introduced this scheme with the Liberal Party's backing, She said that the best way to fund it was with a 0.5% levy, Medicare levy, increase in the Medicare levy on all Australians, for all Australians. And we have done that too. We have found that it did not fund the entire scheme. So we have increased that levy from 0.5% to 1%. I'm yet to meet one person in my electorate and in the community at large who begrudges the idea that they would pay an extra 0.5% on their income tax to fund a scheme that helps the most vulnerable Australians who are vulnerable because they have, through no fault of their own, and they have no other choice. In my own community, I have two such people. One is Scott Lennon. Scott was sailing one day, turned his back at the wrong time, got hit by the boom swinging over because the boat jibed when it wasn't meant to. He could have died. He got into port. He's had almost 2.5 years of intensive rehabilitation, funded by the New South Wales government and funded by his insurance at work. He used to be a partner at PwC. He is going through, and now does volunteer work for me. He is going through an extraordinary period in his life. People like Scott deserve to be supported by government, by the community. And if government is nothing more, it is an outreach of the community. People like Adam Johnston, who was born with a chronic disease. Adam has been one of the bearers, the standard bearers of funding for stem cell research, both here and around the world. NDIS will provide Adam with the opportunity to carry out the important work that he has so nobly begun. Why won't the Labor Party support this? Why, when they introduced the scheme, was a 0.5% levy okay, but when we ask Australians to make a small contribution to ensure people like Scott and Adam get the funding and the support they require, are they opposed? Why do they continue to argue about how the cake is sliced rather than standing with us to grow the cake? There are some in my community, everywhere I go, people say to me, look, we understand that we have to play our part to get the budget back into surplus and to pay off the debt that the Labor Party left us with. But why are we the only people accepting that burden, whether they be superannuants or pensioners? That is a common theme that I get. But the fact of the matter is the government is taking steps on its own. We have reduced spending growth to the lowest level since the Whitlam government was elected. If no other government has achieved what we have achieved in reducing spending. There are a lot of people in the public service, a lot of people in Canberra who have made sacrifices to ensure that this is the case. But we are delivering more with less. This budget is not about tax increases. The real story about this budget is the spending restraint that this government is showing for all Australians, to show that we are committed to paying our way. Because the thing is, you can't have a budget deficit that doesn't stop. And as Irving Kristol once said, the thing is, it takes a long time, it takes a lot longer for things to stop than you think, and then they stop a lot faster than you want. It's important that we have the capacity that this House, that this Parliament shows that we are serious, that we are part of the solution, not part of the problem. Because after all, we created the problem of these debts and deficits, and therefore we have to more than play our part. Look at the infrastructure deficit. When you look at my community, it pays a lot. Members of my community pay a lot of tax. They don't get a lot of government services, and frankly, they don't ask for a lot either. But of the 10 worst congested roads, 3 of them are either on the northern beaches of Sydney or service the northern beaches of Sydney. And we only have one form of transport option on the northern beaches, and that is road. That's why what Minister Chester has done in terms of creating the National Rail Passenger Fund is so critical for our area. I spoke to Minister Chester last night. I've strongly put the case for the metro to the new hospital being built at Frenchs Forest, between Chatswood and Frenchs Forest. This rail line, this metro, would open up so many opportunities for people to use other forms of transport rather than their car and buses. It would create a seamless link for people to get to the hospital and get to any part of where their jobs and work might be. It is a critical part of unclogging the roads of the Northern Beaches and to improve the lives of so many who give so much and ask for so little. So when I spoke to Minister Chester last night, I said to him that it is time, that the time has ended for us to dilly-dally on this. We need to get the money for this train that has been planned since Bradfield put the plans in place in 1932. By getting this extra funding, hopefully the state government can accelerate its rollout of these trains and this line. And I'll be speaking to the State Minister for Transport and strongly arguing that he make an application to this fund as part of that process. Our roads. There is not a day that doesn't go by when a member of my local community says, not only are our roads congested, but look at the state of them. So I've been able to wrangle out of Minister Chester another $2 million to improve the roads in our area and make sure that they live up to the standards that any person living on the Northern Beaches should expect, and that most other people in Australia enjoy. I mean, and then when you look at major truck accidents, there have been 5 in the last 5 years. We've had 4 large vehicles roll over. Fortunately, none of them have crushed anyone, but they've all caused major incidents, and it was only by the grace of God that no one got killed. In Mona Vale, we had a tanker that blew up. It blew up. It blew up next to residential housing and to major businesses that employ nearly 2,000 people. This isn't good enough in Australia of the 21st century. I will be advocating for the state government to make application for the heavy truck safety fund to improve these roads and to improve the situation, and for that solution to be indelible, not makeshift solutions, but actual solutions that allow people to go about their work without fear of a truck rolling over. We also, while we have one of the most beautiful areas in the world, we also have some of the most expensive housing in the world. The average price of a house now on the Northern Beaches is about $1.6 million. I met with Paul Maddock the other day, a resident of Avalon, and David Muir and others from Avalon, who made the point that what they worry about is the fact that their children will not be able to enjoy the same standard of living that they enjoyed, will not be able to enjoy the same opportunities that they enjoyed. Now, we all know that the answer to housing affordability is more supply and better transport. And this budget goes some way to delivering that. But the other thing that this budget does is it gives first home buyers a faster pathway to owning their first home. The superannuation savings account, which will have the same tax concessions as the superannuation fund, will allow first home buyers to save money at 30% higher or 30% faster than they would otherwise. The release of defence lands, the release of the $1 billion fund to assist state governments to roll out the supply of housing through the infrastructure, through improved infrastructure. All of these things will put downward pressure on the cost of housing on the Northern Beaches. And this is critical for our children and for our children's children. Pensioners in my area have suffered the brunt and the burden of what we are trying to do to restore integrity to our budget. So I was so pleased that Minister Porter listened to so many on our side of this House when he restored the concessional card for pensioners. People like Ralph and Lillian Schubert, who haven't asked for anything in life, who've worked hard, who've paid taxes, who've made a massive contribution to Australia, both through World War II and onwards, who continue to make a massive contribution to our community, will now get the same benefits that they have always enjoyed, whether it is in reduced rates at RMS, reduce rates for CTP insurance, reduce rates generally. They will be able to make this budget allows them to live their lives to the full extent that they should.
I thank the member.